Welcome back to the Dynasty Locker Room podcast, episode 4. I'm your host, Nation, and with me today, I have Tessmonster and Tyler. Tyler, how are you doing today?
Not too bad. Excited to continue on the prospects and have a little banter with Tessmonster and you. Just came out with my AL West Bust article, so I'm excited to see some readers either try to communicate with me on why they disagree or agree with me, but really excited to be talking about baseball right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is Super Bowl weekend, but baseball's always on our mind. Tessmonster, what do you got going on over there?
You know, it's been kind of a busy week. We've been looking at some AL Central prospects. We've been working on some waiver wire posts for hockey and, digging into some position rankings. And now we're here to banter about some more prospects with, obviously, Tyler and yourself. So it's going to be a fun day.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. I know we just got done releasing our kind of NFL season wrap-up podcast. It's really exciting. It was a lot of fun to put together with Jason. And kind of during that and right before we started that, apparently this universal DH is a thing now in the MLB. I'm not a fan of it. Tyler, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think in this podcast, I'm going to be of the minority, but I think when it comes to a fan base, I think a lot of people are going to be approving of this. I know Tessmonster and I have disagreed over this, but at some point when hitters stop working on their, or when pitchers stop working on their hitting, you got to get rid of that. And I think for fans that have been following baseball since they were born, or fans that are new to the sport, I think overall it's going to be, create a much better product on the field. So I'm a huge fan of it. I'm really excited to see what that's going to do to National League teams. And, is that going to mean that there's going to be more players out there available from a hitting standpoint in fantasy that we need to keep our eyes out on? How about you, Tessmonster?
Boy, that is a terrible take, and I always relish at the opportunity to tell you you're wrong. For fantasy baseball and fans that don't want to see pitchers hit, obviously it's great. It also gives some more guys who can't play defense at all opportunities to earn some money. So I guess that's a thing. But adding the universal DH is a sad day for baseball, in my opinion. Puts to death all of the strategy, game planning, and true baseball that the National League has always featured. I'm probably in the minority on the whole. Maybe not on this podcast, but this is fundamentally bad for baseball, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm on your.
I have to chime in here real quick because you guys are both Twins fans, and I got to give you a little grief here. When as Twins fans, you guys got to watch Nelson Cruz for a couple of years there, relish at a position where he didn't have to touch the field and just mash for you guys. And I don't see how you guys didn't enjoy that, and why National League fans shouldn't get to enjoy that as well.
Was it fun to watch? Sure. Should he have played the field? Absolutely. Put Ohtani in the field then.
Yeah, I mean, having Nelson Cruz here was a lot of fun watching him swing the bat. But from that baseball purist side, I'm with Tessmonster on. It made those inter league games that much more enjoyable when you got to get the American League pitchers going over there and swinging the bat. How excited some of them were kind of going over there and being able to hit for the first time in a while. And I always think growing up of a lot of these pitchers were the most athletic person on their team. They were hitting in high school. They were hitting in college. And just because they get to the big leagues, I feel like you should be able to still go out there and swing a bat. That's always one of the things that was most exciting and gave some of those NL teams an advantage is when you're running out a Greinke or a Mad Bomb, being able to have a hitter that has a chance of putting one out, getting on base, 2 out of every 3 games, and being able to give you that little edge in a couple of at-bats over the course of the season. So that'll definitely be something that I'm missing out on. But enough of real baseball until that becomes a sign. Let's get back to the second segment of our top 100 prospect series, looking at the players from about 50 to 75. There are some really interesting thoughts in the first one, and not as much back and forth with similarities in the rankings coming up here. Some prospects weren't on both lists, but this is a top 100 and not a top 500. And we'll kick it off right away with Tessmonster. And with that, we'll kick it off with the first prospect on the list. And Tessmonster, who do you want to talk about here?
I think we're going to jump right into DL Hall. Number 67 on the combined list. I've got him a little bit higher than Tyler. We're looking at a guy here who was a first-round pick of the Orioles in 2017. Another victim of that lost development time between 2020 and had an injury-shortened season this year. Absolutely has one of the best pitches in the minors for a lefty, though. Sat at 97 this year before he got hurt. Got that nice, sharp-fighting slider that's evolved since 2019. He's got a plus curveball. Improving feel for the changeup. It looks average, but it plays up, especially when hitters are sitting on that hard fastball. Got that long arm action, though, with a really inconsistent release. Causes some concern for me that he has a little bit of a relief risk in his profile, especially since you're looking at a guy that was injured last year, and he hasn't thrown 100 innings at any level yet, and he's already 23. What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely probably one of the most difficult prospects in this top 100 that I had to rank. I wanted to either rank him higher or I didn't want to rank him at all. I mean, it's just one of those weird guys. I mean, he's got 3+ pitches between his fastball, curve, and slider. He's got a K rate to prove how dominant those pitchers are. He's got a very athletic build, even though he's pretty filled out. I think the biggest complaint about him, however, is his walk rate. I mean, even in years before 2020, he had a walk rate around 5 walks per 9, and in 2021 it was no better, sitting at 4.5 walks per 9. I think this is a guy that, you know, it's hard to teach control, and it's been something that's been holding him back. And sort of like you touched on, I mean, losing that development year, this is something that is a big concern, and it just makes me wonder if he's going to sit in that starter role.
Yeah, I mean, if he can harness that command, he's got some elite upside. And honestly, if he can't, you know, we're looking at elite relief pitcher, but it's really hard to say what he's going to be right now. I've got him a little bit higher just because of that raw talent, you know, the ability we've seen for him to strike the guys out. But it remains to be seen if he can build out his arm, lengthen out a little bit, and harness a little bit of command to get there. I mean, right now we're seeing a Blake Snell mold on the upside just because of how inefficient he is and the lack of being able to go deep into games. But if he can figure out how to do that, he can absolutely touch the peak of his ceiling still.
This seems to be a consistent thing so far with the pitchers ranked here in the bottom half of your top 100 list, of pitchers needing to figure out control, having that big plus stuff, and learning how to rein it in. Is his stuff that much better to be up I don't know, you have him up about 40 slots over Mackenzie Gore and Asa Lacy?
I mean, I think from my perspective, the thing we see here is a really live fastball, even more than these guys. I mean, when you're touching almost triple digits on your high end, I think that adds another dimension to your game. And I think his breaking balls are absolutely on the same level. But you know, with that said, he's shown a little bit more in the sense that he hasn't shown the control issues that they had to that level. I mean, you're talking about 4.5 versus those guys. We touched on Lacy last week, where he was sitting at 7 walks per 9 last year. So I think that's the biggest difference for me. Even though he hasn't lengthened out, he still has some semblance of command, which gives me a little bit more hope, even though he hasn't, you know, hit the innings that somebody like Lacy or Gore has to this point.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is a guy that, even with the command issues, he was still posting a decent ERA. So he showed that, you know, he could still work his way into games and, you know, struggle with his walks, but he wasn't struggling like Lacy and Gore were, where he still was managing the game. So I think that's sort of what earned him a much higher spot.
I can definitely see why that makes sense. Looking forward to him hopefully breaking that 100 innings this year and getting to see some of that electric stuff a little bit more often. And I know, Tyler, you got a big player here on your plate. He's been around for a while. You're talking with 2 Twins fans here. So tell us and tell everyone why Royce Lewis, who you have at 74, and 73 overall in your rankings. Tell us why you like him so much.
Yeah, so this is one of the most exciting Twins prospects that unfortunately we missed out in 2021. I mean, especially with them moving their AAA team around the corner from us, we all sort of talked about being able to easily watch this guy and potentially get the call up. But the injury to Royce did not keep me from forgetting about him. But I had to move him down on the list a little bit, especially after his poor batting averages last year between Double-A and high A ball. But I think if you've lost interest in Royce, let me spark your interest just by mentioning that he's been clocked with a quicker home to first than Byron Buxton at 3.85 seconds compared to Byron, who was 4, just to sort of touch on that elite speed. And, he also has great power from that shortstop position. Without going too far into depth, I think the only thing Royce really needs to work on is staying healthy and better plate discipline.
I think you meant to say that the last time he played was 2019 in A and Double-A, but all that aside, the first overall pick in 2017, he's had a bumpy career to say the least. I mean, you talk about the inconsistency at the plate and injury problems keeping him off the field. Obviously, was promoted aggressively early in his career, but the mechanical issues in his swing completely derailed his development in 2019, like you touched on. He looked a little bit better in the Arizona Fall League, and he carried that success into, the alternate camp in 2020. But that ACL abruptly ending his spring training last year, just was another setback for him. It really remains to be seen if he can continue to make the needed mechanical adjustments in his swing to really take that next step, I think. We've seen him, when fully healthy, utilize all fields with plus hit and power. And you touched on the speed. He's absolutely, the triple threat waiting to happen with a nice mix of power, batting average, on base, whatever your fifth category is, plus that speed. But he's lost a ton of luster on his prospect pedigree just because of all of the time he's missed in the last 3 years.
Yeah, I remember when he was drafted and the excitement from the Twins of Royce Lewis and Miguel Sano at short and third, and what a derailment that has been for us. But thinking about how long he's been around, been one of them top prospects, I really can't think of too many players off the top of my head that have been in a top 100 list for 4 or 5 years now. So that definitely is something that has lost that luster that you said. And if he's available late in your rounds, I mean, you had a previous guy who's been up in the top 20s for years before, coming off a couple of injuries, coming off a down season, could really make that next jump if he's able to make that solid contact and build up a little bit more plate discipline this year. And the next prospect on the list that we're looking to touch on is Pedro Leon. And this is a little gap you guys have. Combined at 60 overall. Tessmonster, you got him at 48. Tyler, you got him at 67. Tessmonster, what's Tyler missing, and why should he be higher?
Well, the biggest thing here I'm banking on is the upside, and we'll get into that. He's got a slight frame. He's 5'9", but absolutely a stick of dynamite with the big bat, speed, and arm skills. The last time we saw him before he signed last year, he homered 15 times in 33 games in the Cuban National Series at only 20 years of age, when he was 8 years younger than everybody else. Disappointing year last year is kind of an understatement. Saw him hit only 220, 9 home runs in 72 games, and an alarming 92 strikeouts. But absolutely an interesting prospect just based on the raw power, defensive acumen, and speed. Still, as Gordon Ramsay would say, raw, which definitely scares me for his age. The Astros also played him at short, center, and third last year, and I really, at this point, have no idea where he's going to find a defensive home. But that said, we touched on it last podcast. I'm not really a huge fan of player comps, but Tyler and I were talking about it. I kind of see a little bit of a Jose Altuve here, just based on the small frame, the good speed, and the big bat.
Yeah, I mean, I think we disagreed just a little bit on him. I mean, obviously this was international player that the Astros signed. He was a little bit older, but they gave him a huge signing bonus. I think it was like $4 million. He was touted as a 5-tool player, short, compact swing. And, based off of, scouting reports, it was saying he wouldn't swing and miss much. However, 2021 was quite a different story for him. Between AA and AAA, he struck out 92 times across 72 games. That put him on pace for about 207 strikeouts across 162 games. And during this, he only batted .220 with 9 home runs, 18 stolen bases, and he was caught 10 times. So it starts to make me question, is the tougher competition for him a little bit too much, where it's going to take him even longer to develop, and we might not see a guy debut till he's 26, 27 years old. That's fine, but you got to sort of put a value on what kind of value that prospect has compared to someone that might debut around 21, 22 years old. So I think that's why I dropped him off. However, I still think he has, great attributes to be a 5-tool player. I don't see him debuting anytime soon.
The most promising thing for me, though, is that he did play most of that competition against the higher levels of minor league ball. So it's not like he's struggling against A-level competition. He's doing it against AA and AAA pitchers. So it gives me a little semblance of confidence that he can rebound once he adapts. Definitely not a guy I expect to see up this year. Maybe towards the end of the year if he's actually productive, but definitely not a guy I'm counting on, in the relatively near future. But there's definitely questions about his game. But I think you'll notice in my rankings in particular, I'm betting on upside versus safer floors in most cases.
That's something that me and you definitely have in common when we're looking at prospects. Is I'd much rather go reach for a guy that has that maybe 2 outcome, either really good or not going to make the majors, versus somebody who's going to come up and possibly the floor of a platoon player and the upside of a decent 6 or 7 hitter. So I do like the upside and the power and the speed, being able to contribute all 5 categories if he gets up, and getting to learn from Altuve there, another small frame like you brought up. Seems like a really good environment for him to be able to utilize his power and grow into it, even with trash cans not being involved. And the next player that both of you have ranked pretty similar is Matt Brash, coming in at 72 overall in your rankings. Tyler, you're a little bit higher on him at 69. Let us know what you like about him and why he deserves to be in this spot in the rankings.
Yeah, I guess the big question is, does anybody know who Taylor Williams is? And if your answer is no, that's exactly my point. Padres gave up Matt Brash for Taylor Williams, who is no longer even on the roster anymore. Don't get me wrong, at this point, nobody had heard of Brash's name. But this could be a huge win for Seattle, who already has some top-tier pitching talent. You got to think of George Kirby, Emerson Handjob. They're their front line's arm in the farm system, but Brash is making a push to be that next arm up. In 2021, Brash pitched 97 innings between A plus and AA ball, and he boasted a 2.13 ERA with a 13.1 K per 9. Walk rate was a little bit high. I am concerned a little bit about his control, but after being promoted, we saw his walk rate even take a dip from 5.3 to 3.8 per 9. He offers a very light fastball in the mid-90s and a great slider, which is probably a little bit closer to a slurve, that he tunnels very well due to his great extension and release point. A lot of my fear with him is that he might become a bullpen arm, but I think after this 2019 season at Niagara, he pitched at rookie ball, A ball, in his dominant 2021 season. He has put a lot of that fear to bed. He's filled out his frame a little bit more, and I think this is a guy right now, 22, going to be 23 years old. This is a guy you can get very cheap next year before he's, a top 20, top 30 prospect.
Definitely a guy to be really excited about. You touched on that Taylor Williams trade, which was kind of interesting because that year he pitched a grand total of 1 inning for the Padres. So clearly a very productive trade for them. Nice career at Niagara, like you mentioned. 12.8 K per 9 in 2019 with that 2.43 ERA made him that 4th round pick. Brief appearance in A-ball that year, but we didn't really see much of him until this last year. And we definitely noticed that velocity increased dramatically. Sits in the upper 90s, tops out at 101. That really nice slider you mentioned, mid 80s, huge break. Definitely that hybrid slider slurve kind of pitch. Throws the occasional curve and change that aren't nearly as sharp. That's okay if you've got two absolutely plus pitches. 2.31 ERA last year between high A and double A. 142 Ks in those 97 innings. Some concern about the spike in the walk rate for me, but that's something he can probably work through as he progresses. Older prospect, we'll probably see him start the year in AAA. Absolutely has a shot to be called up at some point this year, though, if he continues to maintain the same level of pitching.
All I have to say, and we've been touching on it on a couple of podcasts now, and it really covers my whole thoughts, is Mariners. That just sums up their prospects are panning out. I'm all in on him too. I like where you guys have him ranked, and I'm definitely excited to see him get that control down a little bit better and hopefully make that push in the late season to join a club that should be competing for a playoff spot. And now let's head over to the Marlins and look at Yuri Perez. You guys have him ranked at 56 overall, one of your highest rankings that we'll talk about today. Tessmonster, what's there to like about the Mariners prospect, and why is he getting up so high in his rankings?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy I've absolutely fallen in love with while, watching him over the last couple of years. When he signed in 2019, he was kind of a peripheral guy, didn't have a ton of great things about him, but he's absolutely built on it over the last couple of years, built up a ton of arm strength, had a great 2020 season in the Instructs, was the talk of the camp. This year came out flying, 1.96 ERA in 78 innings between A and high A, 108 Ks. He currently sits in the low to mid 90s with that fastball topping out at 97. With that huge frame he's got, he's 6'8". Absolutely room to fill that out and build on that some more. Advanced feel for curve and change, not only for a guy of his size, but for a teenager in general. Very smooth delivery with surprising control for that size and age too. Huge bat missing ability, especially if that curve can get a little bit sharper and top out that velocity a little bit more on that heater. What about you, Tyler? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when you think of Miami pitchers and prospects, you think of Sixto Sanchez, Edward Cabrera, Max Meyer. But I think the Marlins might have struck gold with Yuri Perez out of Dominican Republic. I mean, if you were to tell me at the age of 18 I'd be pitching in the minors, posting a 1.96 ERA across 78 innings with a K rate around 12.5 and a walk rate around 3 or a little bit low, I would say you're full of shit. I mean, this kid was not on my radar till Tessmonster introduced me to him. He's a freak. Plus fastball, plus curveball, and he's working on his changeup. This might be one pitcher who is, by the time he's 20 years old, he might be pitching in the bigs. It would not shock me at all. I think he has that kind of talent. I think the only thing holding him back is all the other pitchers that, we've talked about, prospect-wise, and even in their current rotation, you're thinking of Sandy Alcantara, Pablo, Trevor Rogers, Eliza Hernandez. I mean, Miami has a pitching depth problem, and it's really good, but it could hold Yuri Perez back.
I think those are fair concerns, but in the grand scheme of things, talent is always going to find opportunity, and opportunity, as you like to say, breeds production. So I think this is a case of, let's see what happens with the kid. He's probably going to start in high A again with his age, maybe double A, but definitely a guy I expect to ascend through the ranks as he progresses through this year and next, and wouldn't be surprised at all if he is making that debut in 2023. So, it's a wait and see thing, but absolutely the absolute talent, raw upside, and if he can keep building on that frame, keep that control that we don't see with some of the pitchers lower on this list, could absolutely skyrocket. And by this time next year, he's kind of already gone in every league. So definitely buy in now while he's a little bit under the radar.
You guys both really hit the nail on the head with everything that I would have brought up on him. So let's just jump right into the next player of Joey Weimer. You guys have him at 65 overall. Tyler, you got him all the way up at 50. Tessmonster, you got him down at 80. Tyler, why don't you let us know why he should be that high and why Tessmonster's wrong?
Yeah, I mean, this is a prospect that would have never been mentioned before the 2021 season. It's just, he was not flashy, and, there was nothing really big wow factor for him, but I don't think you can overlook him in 2022. Milwaukee spent a 4th-round pick on a guy who was defensively sound, but offensively they knew he had much more to offer. 6'5", 215 frame. He had even more frame to potentially fill out. In 2021, he did just that. Across 109 games, he hit 27 home runs, batted .296 with a .403 on-base percentage. Very similar numbers to Anthony Volpe, but not mentioned as much. Here's a much more affordable prospect that, that's putting out similar numbers. In his first 75 games at A-ball, he batted .276 with 13 home runs. And in his next 34 games after being promoted, he hit 14 home runs and batted .336. So a lot to love there. And let's not forget, he has a great walk to K ratio, and he has huge raw power potential that he's finally tapping into. He might have gone quietly under the radar coming out of Cincinnati, but his stock is bound to climb even more after this next year. Expect to see him start in Double-A and work his way up to be knocking on the door in bigs by 2023.
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind when we talk about Joey Weimer is the old proverb, once is a fluke, twice is a coincidence, and 3 times is a trend. And this year we saw Joey Weimer do something he's never done before. I mean, you talk about that .296 average with 27 home runs and 30 stolen bases in two levels of A-ball, but we've never seen him do this at any level, including against collegiate pitching at Cincinnati. So I'm absolutely interested in the raw upside that he possesses, but we're also talking about a guy who's going to be 23 and is, competing against guys that are not necessarily above his level. So I think that's a real factor to consider here. But you talked about, some of the changes he made. There's real power potential here that was opened up with the swing tweaks he's made. Opened his stance up, replaced the leg kick with a toe tap. He's got strong hands. Definitely needs some breaking ball recognition improvement. But absolutely upside here is immense. And if he can continue to build on what he's been working on, there's 30-30 potential, like you touched on, not afraid to draw those walks. And if he can build on that, he'll absolutely be a top 20 guy next year. No problem throwing a dart throw at a guy like this, especially with the upside we talked about. We've noted that I'm absolutely banking on, the absolute upside over the safer floor. But for a guy like this who's never done anything close to that on any level, I think there's a little bit of reason for skepticism for me. That's why I got him ranked a little bit lower.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see your concerns, but the only thing that sort of comes to mind is, we sit here and value a prospect like Anthony Volpe, who, is a year or two younger. But when we try to compare and we say, he's never done it before, when Anthony Volpe came in as a prep prospect, there was no history of him actually having the power that he produced in 2021. I mean, yeah, he filled out his frame just like Joey Weimer did, but, there was no inkling that he was going to be a 30 home run potential kind of player. And all of a sudden we're, both putting him in our top 15 prospects. So it makes me question, a guy a year or two older, why are we devaluing so much when he's showing very similar output, as an Anthony Volpe? So Tessmonster, I'd love to sort of hear why, when you think of Volpe, you're willing to throw a guy with similar production down, 60, 70 spots.
I think for me, the biggest thing is the age difference. And when you look at a guy like Volpe versus a guy like Joey Weimer, there's 3 years of age difference. So for a guy like Volpe to do the same thing against A-ball hitting that Joey Weimer did 3 years older, I think there's a significant difference when Weimer saw collegiate level pitching that I'm not necessarily willing to give him the same level of discount that Volpe did, even though they both have, clearly we're seeing guys with advanced plate discipline, good pitch recognition, but to be able to translate that at a younger age gives me quite a bit more confidence in his prospect upside versus a guy who made a couple of swing tweaks, but hasn't produced at any level close to that. And I think that's the biggest difference in variation here for me. And that's why I'm not giving him the discount.
I really like that comparison looking at Volpe and Weimer here. I think people who break out have a tendency to either go under the radar because they weren't a shiny prospect like Weimer and Volpe both were, but now with that age of Volpe really flying up the draft boards, really excited to see if Weimer is able to repeat and build on the success he had last year going forward. But now let's throw it over back to Tessmonster and look at Miguel Vargas. You guys have him ranked at 61, both really similar in your rankings. Seems like a pretty solid player with a little bit of upside. Tell us a little bit more about him.
Well, I'll be the first to clarify that we're talking about Miguel Vargas, the third baseman for the Dodgers, and not one of the other prospects out there with the same name. Talking about the 2017 international signee out of Cuba by the Dodgers. He had some nice seasons in 2018 and 19, but flew under the radar with his 300 average because he never showed the power. That all changed last year. He broke out with 52 extra base hits in 120 games between A and AA. Definitely the fringy first base, third base type, not exceptionally defensively sound, but definitely has some sneaky speed, swiped some bags last year. You know, he was previously projected as the high batting average utility type, but I think if his power can hold its upside, he definitely has a much higher ceiling than maybe we first anticipated.
You know, Tessmonster, I appreciate you throwing a little shade at me for doing some research on the St. Louis Cardinals prospect, Miguel Vargas. But, you know, when you look at this prospect out of Cuba, I'm very high on his potential. In 2019, he had a great batting average with great plate discipline. His strikeout to walk ratio was amazing, but he did lack power. In 2021, he took that next step by putting up 23 home runs with a 319 batting average, great on-base percentage over a 120-game span. He also managed to swipe 11 bags, but I don't expect him to put up more than 5 to 10 stolen bases a year. I don't think he's got that great of speed. But if the Dodgers are looking for a great replacement when Turner is done, I see Vargas as being a great option. I think my biggest concern with him is that his power is just from pulling. I think he hits to all sides of the field very great, but when he looks to really hone in on his power, I think it really dominates when he actually tries to pull the ball, and I think that could really limit his approach against higher end pitching. So I think that's something that I can see him struggling when he starts to see, pitching at a higher level, AA, AAA, into the big leagues.
I think that's a valid concern. But when you talk about a guy who's got a good hit tool to all fields, it kind of is a little bit diminished for me, especially if he can maintain that batting average. A lot of guys in Major League Baseball today are really taking that pull-heavy approach when hitting for power, and there's no mistake why. I mean, obviously the field is much shorter to left or right field, and that brings a big aspect to the game when you don't have to do as much. You can put a little loft on it with some exit velocity, and it goes out of the park. And we've seen a lot of hitters do that. You look at Jorge Polanco last year, or any of the other various hitters like Mike Zunino, and that's absolutely the predominant power approach in today's game. So it doesn't really concern me, especially if he can push the ball for such a high batting average. I think there's a ton of upside if he can, keep hitting for power and really hold that 20 to 25 home run mark.
I guess, Tessmonster, one question I have to ask you, because we've talked about another prospect for the Dodgers that's sort of playing a very similar position. Do you see Miguel Vargas or Michael Busch being the future at third base for the Dodgers?
I think when you look at a guy like Michael Busch, who obviously Minnesota-born, homegrown talent here, it's a little bit different for me because he plays a little bit of a different position. He's probably going to be stuck behind that gap up the middle. So I'm not 100% sure where he profiles either, to be perfectly honest. Stuck behind Gavin Lux, Corey Seager, guys like that. So it remains to be seen where he ends up finding a home. But, you talk about a left-handed bat in Busch versus a right-handed bat in Vargas. You hope not to see kind of the platoon, but it's absolutely a possibility, and one I'm not really relishing. But obviously both of these guys are still young, and Vargas is only going to be 22 next year. So there's still a ton of time to grow and for that lineup to evolve and push guys in and out as we go. So upside is absolutely the ceiling for Vargas. It just remains to be seen where he ends up finding a home long term.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And don't forget about the DH available to both of them now, unfortunately. And let's kick it over to a prospect now that you guys have ranked at 68. Tyler, you got him coming in at 62. Tessmonster up at 75. And that's Heliot Ramos. Tyler, tell us what you like about him and his upside moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. This is not a top outfield prospect for the Giants. Ramos, however, is the closest MLB-ready prospect. Put up 14 home runs across 116 games this year at AA and AAA. Batted about 254 with about a 323 on base percentage, and he also managed to swipe 15 bags across 19 attempts. His K to walk ratio was one of his biggest struggles for 2021. But in 2019, he batted 291 with a 369 on base percentage, stole 8 bases, 16 home runs. He offers pretty good speed, and the bat potential is clearly there, but he needs to work on his plate discipline. This is a guy I really think, based off proximity, this is why I rank him a little bit higher. I think he's that 2020 candidate that, I really search for. I think he's a very safe 250, 260 hitter. This is a guy that I could see being up in the big leagues this year. And I actually wrote a piece about him this last month. I think he's going to probably play 60 to 80 games for the Giants this year and really start to make an impact and, place himself in left or right field for them. So I think, if you're looking for someone proximity wise to really make a stance and, be placed in the outfield for the next 10 years, I think this is a guy that can really do it and be a 2020 candidate.
I think this highlights one of the philosophical differences that we have, and I'll touch on that in a bit. But, you look at a guy who was the first round pick by the Giants in 2017, and he absolutely jumped up the board right away with that 348 average and 23 extra base hits in 35 games of rookie ball, which is outstanding by any means. But he struggled the next year in A ball, had a nice bounce back in high A, but then struggled again in Double A. Struggles at the plate have helped him turn opposite field hitting into a tool, and that was an asset for him in 2019 with half of his home runs being to the opposite field. But the strikeout issues haven't gone away. His batting average improved at AAA last year, which was promising, but then he had the dropout in power, which was absolutely concerning. As a bigger guy, his speed is never going to be a carrying tool in major leagues, even with the steals he had last year. And my questions on his ability to hit consistently for average and power have consistently moved him down my rankings. And so my question for you, Tyler, is if 15 home runs is his upside with a 260 batting average, can't you find something like that on the waiver wire?
Yeah, no, I definitely understand your concerns, Tessmonster, and the, availability and picking up some free agents that might have a similar, production standpoint at an older age. But when you think from a, dynasty standpoint, this is a guy that, threw up 16 home runs and, high A ball, Double A. And, this year, yeah, he regressed a little bit, only 14 home runs, but I still think he has that power ability. And then when you think about him on the the base paths, yeah, he's not super fast, but he has that intelligence on the bases where I think, his speed is really something that people underestimate. I think this is a guy that still is a 2020 candidate. And whether you want to gamble on someone in free agent pickups or put someone in your minor system that is a 2020 candidate, I think this is a guy that flies under the radar.
One of the things I think is underrated that we haven't really touched on is we've been talking about going for high upside, and Ramos here might be a safe floor getting up early. But how deep of a roster do you have? Is there players that have that 2020 or even just 20 home run upside on your waiver wire? So I think depending on how deep of a lineup you're running, if you're only running 12 hitters, if you're going to 15 or 20 or 25 hitters, that changes a lot on how you could value somebody like Ramos here. And I want to throw it right back to you again, Tyler, with Austin Wells. You guys have him ranked at 69 and both very similar. So tell us what you like about him.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy, Tessmonster, I mentioned to you last year, and it might have been a year too soon, but he sort of was flying on my radar. He is a very athletic specimen for a catcher who has already sort of maxed out his frame, 6'2", 220. He has plus speed for a catcher, but will probably sit around 10 to 15 stolen bases a year. He's been known to be very versatile and has played outfield and first base, which is a little bit of concern for me. You know, are we going to see him, stay behind home plate for long, or is he going to move positions? I still think he is an above average catcher, and his bat plays anywhere. If he stays behind the plate, he has the talent to be a top tier catcher. But if he moves off that position, I still see him being a 20 to 25 home run guy, high on base percentage because of his plate discipline. I mentioned this guy, last year as a late round steal. I think this year he's sort of moving up the rankings, and I still think he is a very good option at a catcher position where you can get those stolen bases in a roto league, you can get those home runs. The price has obviously gone up, but I think after this year, with the need that the Yankees need at the catcher position, I think he's only going to move up the rankings even more.
Well, I will say this. This is a player I do like, but I am considerably less optimistic about his upside to stay at catcher than you are. We see the first round pick of the Yankees in 2020 absolutely tore it up at Arizona with a 360 average in his collegiate career, 260 average, 390 on base with 476 slugging and 2 levels of A ball with 44 extra base hits, and a surprising 16-0 steal rate in 103 games last year. I do think he is likely to change positions, mostly because of his offensive potential and the fact that he is subpar behind the plate. He's not a good receiver of the ball, and arm injuries have left him below average with his arm strength, even on his best days behind the plate. Opposing teams swiped 98 bases in 70 games against him last year. And like we said about Harry Ford last week, if you can't throw guys out, you can't stay behind the plate. There is a ton to like about his bat, though. He's got plus power despite his swing and miss rate of 116 Ks in 103 games last year. I think he's most likely to slot into left field long term, with the question marks here around his arm and everything else about his receiving ability behind the plate. Probably start the season at Double-A ball. Could see a debut from him in 2024.
Yeah, Tessmonster, I understand your concerns. I think, the arm is his major weakness behind the plate. I think he frames the ball well, and I think he is, very good at blocking. And I understand that's not everything, an MLB catcher needs to have. But when you look at the catcher needs right now, I mean, yeah, Gary Sanchez can throw out people, but he is very subpar on everything else, framing pitches, blocking pitches. And I think when I look at the needs of the Yankees, I think they're willing to take on a guy that, might not throw out a ton of people, but he's got a plus bat from that catcher standpoint, and there's going to be an improvement off of Gary Sanchez. So, I really think, have they tried trading for someone? And you and I have mentioned that they went for Jacob Stallings, who's still not a great catcher, but he's got a better arm than both of them. And I think the Yankees are willing to settle, and I think this is a guy that they could settle on.
Like we've said, with opportunity comes production, and if he is able to stay at catcher, the Yankees are able to deal with a negative arm back there, which they have been dealing with, a revolving door at catcher for some time now. But being able to plug him back there, having that speed and that upside of being able to have that speed like we touched on at catcher and being able to boost your roster really does bring some upside if he's able to stick at catcher and not compete with some of those elite outfielders as he grows up and might have to make that move. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out this year, something to definitely keep an eye on. And now, Tessmonster, I want to get your opinion here. We got Nick Lodolo here, the highest ranked player we're going to talk about at 51. You have him cracking the top 50 at 45. Tell us why he's so high and what you like about him.
There's something I really like about Nick Lodolo, and I think it's the raw upside combined with the safe floor that trends me a lot higher on him. We saw him have that strong year at TCU with a 2.36 ERA and 131 Ks and 103 innings that made him a first-round pick in 2019. We saw him have a 2.31 ERA with 50 innings between Double-A and Triple-A last year and showcased that strong 13.9 K per nine, but he was a bit homer prone in his 3 starts in AAA. We don't see a ton of sinker slider types anymore, but he has plus command, and that sinker sits in the mid 90s. But the slider is really the true out pitch here. He's got a nice changeup offering as well. The curve needs some seasoning. We saw him have a tendency to leave it up in the zone instead of burying it last year. That's going to have to improve going forward if he's going to use that at the major league level. He's got a lower slot level than most starters do, but he does have great east and west command despite that. The good repeatable delivery trends towards the safe floor. We saw him showcase a nice walk per nine ratio that really gives him the upside here that I really like in a starting pitcher.
Yeah, Tessmonster, you sort of touched on it that, he's a safe floor player, but, that's all I viewed him at before this last season. And now I've changed my mind quite a bit. Watching him this season, he was able to maintain a very high K rate in AA. Earned himself a promotion to AAA. His walk rate was amazing, right around 2 walks per nine across 50 innings. He's very tall, very lengthy, and I can see him even, filling out a little bit more than he has. One thing I really do like, and you don't see a lot of these young pitchers, is he actually holds his velocity late in the games, which is very promising to think, moving into the bigs when he starts to stretch those innings out even more, that he's going to be able to maintain that velocity and that production. I think this is a guy that makes his debut in 2022 for Cincinnati and, has the potential to maintain a high K rate north of 10 Ks per nine in the bigs. With his control, he no longer just seems like that safe pick, but a plus arm with the potential to be a, number 2, number 3, in Cincy in a couple of years.
Right. He's got a ton of upside, like we both touched on. Really, the exciting thing outside of the walk rate is that ability to maintain that strong K per nine ratio, even in the upper levels of the minor leagues, which really has me excited, especially for a guy that doesn't have a ton of plus velocity, but the movement on his pitches really sets him apart. Sitting with the low 90s on the sinker doesn't do a ton for you, but it's got all of that movement, especially towards the hand side. And that slider is really that out pitch where even if he's only showcasing 2, 3 plus pitches at the major league level, somebody like that can absolutely make an impact, especially once he gets stretched out. So it's somebody I look to see hopefully throw somewhere north of 150 innings this year, really build that out and give him a strong building block going forward through his major league career.
This seems like the area now that we're approaching that top 50. You got him ranked at 51, where now we're not talking about just having plus stuff, but also incorporating that control that we've been talking about, that some of these really talented arms with plus couple pitches haven't quite been able to put it together. And it looks like now as we're approaching the top 50, you're starting to see the players for pitching that have put it all together, and you're really excited to see them come up and expect them to be able to blossom this year or immediately in 2023. And now let's look over in the Red Sox organization. Tyler, tell us why Nick York ranks at 59 in your guys' rankings.
Yeah, I hate talking about Red Sox prospects because I'm not a big fan, but there's not often you're going to find me throw a prep bat this high in the rankings after just 1 year. But batting .325, .412 on base percentage, 14 home runs, 13 stolen bases across 97 games in A ball and high A. It makes it easy for me to put him this high in the rankings. Here's a guy who was drafted knowing that he was a great hitter, but he would need to fill out more before that power came around. It only took us a year before that power was already starting to show. You're always looking for a player at a young age to steal and break the bigs before they're 22, 23 years old. This is a guy that's already, shown that potential that he has the hitting tool. He's a good defender. This is one prospect I will talk about that I think could easily break the bigs at a very young age. When you think about Roto or Points League, this is a guy that could hit all categories, put up big points. He's got great plate discipline. He's already bunkered down at second base too, in my opinion. And I think that makes him even that much more valuable, knowing how weak the second base position is. So Tessmonster, I'd love to sort of know what you think about him.
This is an interesting name for me. We see another California prep bat that made his name on that plus bat ability, and that's really something we've seen as a trend in the last couple of years with prospects coming out of the West Coast, is that plus bat. He's absolutely a polished hitter and really showcased it this year in 2021 in 2 levels of A ball with that 325 average, 14 home runs, 13 steals on 22 attempts isn't necessarily promising, but the fact that he has a little bit of speed is interesting to me. Had that healthy walk to strikeout ratio, which gives him a ton of upside, especially in that points league, but absolutely in those on-base percentage leagues too. I'm a little bit concerned about his defensive ability to stay at short, like you said. Definitely lacks the arm strength. Will have to probably stay at second base, where he is a little bit stronger defensively, I think. I'm also a little bit cautious on the power here, just because there wasn't a ton of it in his pre-draft profile. But if it continues to play, he'll absolutely be a lot higher on the list next year. As we said, with the trend, 1 year is a fluke, 2 years is something else, and 3 years is a trend. So, if we can continue to see that play in his profile, especially as he works his way up against higher level pitching, we'll absolutely see his name run up the list a lot faster. Definitely a guy I'm comfortable throwing a dart at, especially in this range.
I always value that hit tool too. I think, especially at a young age, when you have a great hit tool, when you can build kind of your approach at the plate and come with an already advanced approach at a young age, really bodes well for a player's development. And somebody like York here, I really agree with both of you too. I see him flying up the draft boards and building on an already impressive start to his career. And now let's start with the home stretch of the final prospects to talk about here in the middle of our top 100. And that's going to be Yuniesky Noel. You guys got him ranked at 55. Both pretty similar rankings. Tessmonster, is there anything people don't know about him that they should?
Well, this was one of the many dips into the international pool for Cleveland in 2017. This year, he absolutely tore it up with a 340 batting average, 19 long balls, 34 total extra base hits over 2 levels of A ball. Elite level exit velocity and bat speed are his calling cards, but he makes excellent contact for a guy known for his power hitting ability. Ability to make good contact to all fields, too, is really a carrying ability here, too. Undeniable power against both left-handed and right-handed pitchers. There are a couple red flags here, though. Plate discipline leaves a lot to be desired. Only drew 17 free passes in 70 games last year, something he'll have to work on. Also has a tendency to get pull happy at times, a little bit to his detriment, not necessarily in the power hitting variety, but also kind of limiting his batting average when he does try and do that. So that's something I'm going to be looking for him to build on. But obviously, as a guy who's only going to be 20 next year, there's a ton of upside here if he can carry that batting average, that home run potential forward into AA, AAA. It's going to be a guy I'm really excited about for a long time. And if you've seen any of his training videos that Cleveland has posted on Twitter, it's absolutely a watch. This guy's a workout monster.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy, when I looked at his scouting report early on, it made me wonder, are we just that far off on him, or did they get it wrong? I mean, his hit tool was something that they thought was very subpar. But, I mean, you watch his 2021 season, you can't deny, I mean, a 340 batting average, 19 home runs across, 70 games. It's very impressive, but my concern, sort of like you said, he's got a long swing and very poor plate discipline. I really start to wonder, as he climbs the rankings and starts to face better pitching, is this something that we're going to see him struggle? I think, we saw the best version of him in 2021, and I think we're going to start to see, when he starts to face better pitching, that come down to par. Now, that being said, we've already seen the upside on his power potential and his hitting potential. So, when he faces better pitching, is he going to be a 30 home run kind of guy, or is he going to start to fall down the rankings? I ranked him pretty high because I really do see a plus guy here that, still is going to offer a 260 kind of average once he develops into his own and starts to see better pitching. But I really am concerned that what we saw in 2021 is not the real Mr. Noel that we know.
That's an interesting point, and I guess for me, that raw upside and power potential alone, that elite bat speed, that high end exit velocity, that's not something that happens by accident, as Nation likes to say. And so for me, this is a guy who he's got the raw tools, the raw ability. It's really just a matter of letting it manifest itself, especially over time. We saw him at 19 years old facing pitchers that were, 3-4 years older than him. So that's a lot of promise there. And if he can continue to make small adjustments, and I'm not 100% sure, there's something we see a lot with some of these guys who make contact so easily that they just never develop that ability to draw the free pass. We see that a lot with guys in the bigs right now, like Eddie Rosario. He has such impeccable ability to make contact outside of the strike zone that he just never developed that ability to draw the free pass. And that's a concern, but if he's making contact at such a high rate and getting them to drop in, it's just not necessarily a tool they necessarily need to develop over time either. And so that'll be interesting to me to see how that plays out, especially with that raw power ability. I mean, 20 home runs in 70 games doesn't happen by accident either. So there's something to be said for that as well.
Yeah, I guess where I challenge that, sort of like you mentioned, is 1 year. I mean, are we basing this off of 1 year, and is that enough to say that he's that kind of caliber player? Like you said with Joey Weimer, I mean, is 1 year enough to say, wow, what did he just do, and is that going to be sustainable? I just think this is a guy that, when he moves up the ranking with that long swing, I think regression is bound to happen, and I guess that's my fear with him. There is very huge upside with him. I mean, he's got great power, he's got a great frame, and I see what you're coming from, but this is a guy that either is going to climb up the rankings very quick or fall off completely.
And that's fair to say too, but I think with John Kenzie, I think what we see here is 10 home runs in 4 in rookie league, 6 home runs in rookie league in a small sample size too, where he has that power, he's got that bat speed, he's got that exit velocity that have been the playing cards for him before. And whether or not that batting average fully translates isn't a huge concern to me, where he's hit, 280 over previous seasons too, where I don't think he's going to be a 340 hitter in his career. That's absolutely not the selling point for me, but it's that upside in the power against both-handed pitchers that really carries for him. And it's a guy I like to see improve upon that, to be perfectly honest. I don't think there's any way we see him hit less than 20 home runs over a full season.
That plus power is definitely something that might even have him higher on my rankings than both of yours. And as Tessa mentioned, some things just don't happen by accident. And especially being a workout warrior and being able to translate that by making solid contact, this is a player that I'll be reaching for in my drafts, because that is some elite upside I see coming forward. And one of those players that you can get right now, you guys have him in the 50 range, that if he builds on what he did last year, he's somebody that could be in that first round conversation next year on a big jump like Volpe this year. And now the final prospect that we want to touch on in this episode is Brian Roquillo. You guys have him at 58. Tyler, you have him up at 51. Tessmonster down at 64. Tyler, why don't you kick us off and tell us about this electric bat?
Yeah, I mean, here's a guy I had no interest in going into the 2021 season. He was around 150, 160 pounds wet, but one of his best tools was his speed. But even then, he was caught stealing 8 times in 22 attempts in 2019. After the 2021 season, he had a year off. I've changed my opinion drastically. He's filled out a little bit more, sits around 175 pounds now, about 5'10". And with that has come more pop. He's put up 15 home runs across 108 games between high A and double A. Managed to steal 21 bags. Still got caught 10 times though. He's a switch hitter that gets down the line around 4.08 seconds from left side and about 4.15 from the right side. So very fast. He's been mainly used as a shortstop in the minors, and I actually predict that for Cleveland, he's going to maintain that position. If you're drafting him, you're buying into his ability to hit 15 to 20 home runs and still 25 plus bags, which I think is very possible with his speed. He's got great plate discipline, intelligence on the base path. And yeah, I think he's got a lot of attributes to like about him.
I think this is another guy from that 2017 international signing class by the Indians that you're going to hear a ton about going forward. Among the players with the safer floor due to his exceptional defensive ability to stay at shortstop and a great feel for contact at the plate. The switch hitter absolutely splashed last year, like Tyler said, 15 home runs, 21 swipes. That fringy power potential has really seen his stock improve over the last year, and that could profile at the top of an order. I'd like to see that walk rate improve, but again, like we talked about with those guys who make contact so easily, it just might never materialize, and that's fine if he maintains that high batting average. We could definitely see him post some nice 15-15 lines in his career, but let's be honest, this is definitely a guy I don't expect to see his power play up long term, and he's definitely probably about that 10 home run range in the major leagues, I think, going forward.
Yeah, Tessmonster, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, it's one of those, you know, like you said, safe floor. And I hate to say that we're agreeing on a player, but still, he's moved up my rankings. And, you know, if he fills out a little bit more, you know, like you said, I don't think that power plays much more than it has. But, you know, with the speed, if he can hit 15 home runs and swipe 25, 30 bags, he's a good candidate to draft and very safe candidate.
So that rounds out all the prospects that we wanted to touch on here in that 50 to 75 range. Be on the lookout upcoming for that 25 to 50 range. Going to show out a little bit in the next week. Tessmonster, what else do you got coming up here?
Yeah, we're going to keep running through the top 15 prospects by division. Next week, touching on the American League West. That'll be an exciting one to touch on. Not quite as deep of a division as some of the others, so it'll be interesting to see which ones have to pop up from outside the top 100 to make the list. Obviously, running through some more buys and sells. Those are just about done. Just the National League outfielders remaining there, so it'll be interesting to round that out. Working on some hockey content coming up. I touched on the position rankings by group. So forwards are done. Those will be up and posted soon. Working on defensemen and goalies next. Those will be exciting. And then working through some more baseball content. You touched on the top 100 prospects. We're working on those top dynasty players. So that'll be exciting to write up on. And then maybe touching on some more podcasts, you know, NHL podcasts, talking about some guys that are worthy of rostering in banger leagues. Obviously, that's less touched on than some of the points leagues. So that'll be fun to dive into, and maybe jumping into another podcast here with Jason coming up, talking about something other than quarterbacks and running backs, because they're not what runs the NFL anymore.
Right. That's definitely going to be an exciting week and 2 weeks coming up here. Definitely looking forward to getting out our top 300 dynasty players. I think there's going to be a lot of content and a lot of debate on where some of those players fall between us. And Tyler, let everyone know what you got coming up here as well.
Yeah, I plan on touching, you know, on my boom and bust candidates on the NL Central. I think there's a lot of interesting people in there. You know, Milwaukee has a lot of great pitchers that they've had producing this year. And after my boom and bust candidates in the NL Central, I plan on finishing this article I've been working on, Michael Kopech. Nation, I know you're very high on him, and I have an article that I plan on launching here the next week that will sort of touch why you should be big buyers on Michael Kopech. After that, I do plan on working with Jason on 10 prospects that you might not have heard of, but that should be working their way into the top 100 if they haven't already. So yeah, look for that to, you know, be posted on here on Twitter, on Reddit, and on Dynasty Locker Room homepage. Yeah,
definitely really excited to see your article on Kopech. Everyone knows I'm really high on him, and be able to discuss that a little bit in the next podcast coming up, touching on the prospects and being able to, again, dive a little bit deeper and talk about why some of these prospects make that jump into the top 50 coming in this year. So that's going to be really fun. Any last words, Tessmonster?
Obviously, you know where to find me, DLR Tessmonster, Reddit, Twitter. Come check us out. Come see all of the vast content we have on Dynasty Sports. Absolutely itching to get more people involved in our community, and, you know, give us some insight on the forums on, you know, things they're interested on and where we can expand on. Really excited to see where it goes from here, and excited to continue breaking down the top 100 prospects. And like you said, the top 300. It's going to be a really exciting month for baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tyler, what about you?
I actually don't want us to forget about a shot bet. I think we all sort of discussed the shot bet that we would do. And, what more fitting during the MLB lockout to talk about when we think the first spring training game will be aired. And, Nation, Tessmonster, I know we all sort of thought, when we, gave our opinions on when we think that first televised spring training game will happen. And I'd like to do a 2-shot bet on me saying the first game will be televised March 10th.
Well, I have no opinion that it'll be that quickly. I mean, obviously, we're still working through some things. I'm optimistic that maybe they'll find a deal soon, but I think we definitely see a delay. I could see that March 15th range. So I'll go 5 days after you. I don't want to pull up prices right on you and try and take the wind out of your sails. What do you think, Nation?
And here I was ready to go prices right and go one on each side of Tyler here and really make him live up to his prediction. But I guess if you're going to go 5 spots away, I'll go 5 spots away too. And I will be the pessimistic one here and go March 20th. I think we're going to still be waiting a little bit, and you'll have a few weeks of deliberation still, followed by a few weeks of even just like pitchers and catchers reporting to be able to get to that first spring training game. Hopefully, I'm wrong. This would be one shot bet that I would love to lose to be able to get baseball back a little bit quicker. So, bartender, put that shot on the board. And with that being said, I'm Nation. You can find me at Nation DLR on Twitter, on Reddit. Come find us on the forum, as Tessmonster said, and reach out to us. We're looking for more people to be a part of our DLR Dynasty Baseball League that we're starting up. Going to be a lot of fun to take part in a community league like that and be able to discuss all of the interesting draft picks and transactions that happen throughout the season. So subscribe, give us some comments, and reach out, and we'll be more than happy to share our thoughts on anything Dynasty sports moving forward. So until next time.